Friends, Aaron here. I want to share a scripture with you and some thoughts about that scripture and also about a particular word that's found in that scripture. First of all, I'm going to read to you from the KJV, and the biggest reason for that is because it's the KJV that is referenced in the Strongs, and I'm going to share with you some of the words out of the Strongs. So the scripture is Proverbs 22:6. And Proverbs 22:6 in the KJV says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." So, first of all, I'm just going to touch on the word that I'm not really a big fan of in this Bible verse, and that's the word child. And I don't want to get too far off on a tangent here, but I would like to say that I do believe that our English language has words in it that have meanings that are not by accident, and I'm not really wanting to. I just don't want to use those words if I can avoid them. Now, I've been saying the word children all my life, and so it still comes out of my mouth, but I prefer to say sons and daughters, and I'll tell you why in a moment about this word in particular. But I would like to say two things and try to make this as clear as I can. First of all, so there are words, I think, that are really meant to convey our sort of slavery to our governance, to corporate America. You can do your own research into that, and at some point maybe I'll get more into that, but that's not the point of this video. But words like citizen and person, birth, children, there are certain things to look at: birth certificates, marriage certificates, and just really understanding what the purpose behind those things are and the meaning of the wording within them, and all of this ridiculous legalese that we're subject to. If you think that's crazy or irrelevant, that's fine, and I understand it. But I'd also like to say that it's plain to me that everything is really ultimately energy, right? I mean, even matter is just movement. It's just waves in something, and matter can be manipulated. Sound can be manipulated. Light can be manipulated. Everything can be manipulated by changing the waves, changing the way whatever the subject matter is moves. And, I'm not this sort of speak it into being person, right? This is something that people take much too far, not only people in Christian circles, but in others as well. You speak things into existence. We don't have that sort of power. We don't create like God. And I'm not talking about the power of positive thinking or anything like that. But at the same time, our words do have power, right? Contemporary philosophers will tell you this. Psychologists will tell you this. The scriptures will tell you this. Wherever you want to look, you'll find this answer that there's power in what we say. There's power in a smile. As parents, when we smile, there's a huge difference in the reaction of our children than if we frown at them. And in the same way that our communication is 80% nonverbal, if we take our verbal communication, what percentage of that isn't really about the words that come out of our mouth, but the way we present them, our tone, our inflection, our metering? Do we hesitate when we say this or that? There's so much to how we present our words, the sound of the words as they exit our mouth and roll off our tongue, and so the volume with which we speak. And so I do believe that it's important, words, and that they are sometimes their sound and the way they're metered, it's for a reason. I think that a lot of our world systems are definitely meant to entrap and enslave and to trick us. If you look up on the internet, what the word child means, Well, I mean, you're going to find nothing but benign answers. Well, an infant, a young person, a young human. If you say open up an unabridged dictionary and kind of, one that's got all the definitions, you can kind of work your way down to one that I'll share with you. And I believe this is from Merriam-Webster, and it's the 7th definition down the line of the word child. And it's any person or thing regarded as the product or result of a particular agency or influence, etc. I don't like calling my sons and daughters the product of an agency. They're not, I mean, it's not an illogical idea that they're the product of your marriage, but if you look a little bit into the meaning of the marriage certificate and really what the marriage certificate is all about, that idea might give you pause. It gives me pause, so it's just not a word I like to use. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that a little bit. You can dig into that if you want to, and maybe at some point I'll talk some more about it. But for the time being, in the King James, because I need to read the King James to look up in the Strong's. I looked up the word train, I looked up the word child, I looked up the word go, and I looked up the word depart. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So, train, dedicate, train morally, train up. This makes me think about a physical trainer, someone who's training you to do something. And I could go too far into this, but I'll say, let's say you're going to get a tennis trainer. You're not going to get somebody who's never picked up a racket before. How well are they going to train you? You need someone who can turn up the heat on their services and on their return volleys when your skill level increases, so that they can bring you along as you increase in your skill and ability. They've got to be able to match that. Like, if they're not a good tennis player, then they're not going to be able to teach you or train you to be a good tennis player. You're not going to hire somebody to train you for a marathon who sits on the couch eating donuts and watching television, right? They're going to be somebody who has actually trained and run marathons. But at the same time, that person who's trained and run marathons, they could give you instruction, they could speak an infinite number of words, they could write everything down for you. But that's only going to get you so far. You've got to physically put yourself to the task, and you need that person to show you. There are things that you're going to encounter on a 26-mile run in your body, and to run with somebody who knows, hey, here you're hitting the wall, and here's your second wind, and this is how you pace yourself, and this is how you breathe when this happens or that happens, to kind of take you through the different things that can happen in a race that long while you're actually physically being put through it, right? They have to run with you sometimes. They have to actually go along with you, not just give you instruction verbally, but they have to be there with you to instruct you. So those are my thoughts about training. Like, you have to be actively involved in the training, not just giving verbal instruction. Now, the word child, there's the typical meanings in there: youth, young adult, young man, whatever. But one that really stuck out to me, one use for the word child, according to the Strong's, is infancy to young adulthood. And so, immediately I'm putting this together, this idea that we need to literally be not only giving instruction verbally, but showing our sons and daughters the way from infancy to adulthood. And we've got to be training them up the whole time. And then go is actually an interesting one. It's a combination of 1870, 59:21, and 63:10. And that is according to the way of life. So to go according to the way of life. So if we will train up, in the Young's literal translation, give instruction to a youth instead of a child about his way, in the KJV, and the way he should go. If we will dedicate ourselves to train up morally, and how do you train somebody morally? If I tell you don't steal, but you watch me stealing, if I tell you I love you, but I punch you in the face every day, you're not going to believe that it's wrong to steal. You're not going to believe that I love you. If I tell you to do this and you see me do that, well, what are you more likely to really grab onto? What you see me doing, not what you see me say. And so to train up morally, we've got to be dedicated ourselves to the training. Someone who's going to show you how to run a marathon needs to be dedicated to the training of running a marathon, or they won't be able to run with you. So we've got to be able to run with our sons and daughters as we train them up morally, train them up. We're dedicated to the training from infancy to young adulthood to show them the way according to the way of life. Well, the way of life, the way, the life, and the truth. Yeshua himself, Jesus the Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And what is the way of life? Well, the way of life is repenting of the sin. Like, sin just means to miss the mark. Why is missing the mark such a big deal? It's not the action. It's not what we do. And Jesus taught us that. If any man hates his brother in his heart, he's a murderer. If you lust after your neighbor's wife, well, you're an adulterer. So there's no action. I shared a story about how I hated my brother, and in the eyes of Christ, I'm a convicted murderer. I didn't actually kill anyone. And in the same way, how much do these acts of missing the mark really matter? What matters more than that, what maybe is the only thing that matters at all, pardon me, it's a little uncomfortable on the rocks here, is what's coming out of us. That's not what matters, but what it's coming from, what's in us that's coming out. See, Jesus, he was talking to the Pharisees when they were like, hey, your disciples, they're not washing their hands. They're unclean when they sit down at a meal. Why don't they wash their hands? They didn't have soiled hands. They were clean, but there was a ceremonial bowl on the table with ceremonial water, and they dipped their hands in it as an act, as a symbol of being clean before they took in their food. And Jesus is saying, hey, it's not what you put into you. It's not what you take into your mouth that makes a man unclean, but what proceeds out of him, what comes out of the heart. And it's out of our pride that all of our missing the mark proceeds forth from. So I'm convinced as I go through life, the further I go along in life, that the reason why we sin is because of pride. That's the original sin. And pride leads us into all missing of the mark. So the way of life is to turn from pride. So are we dedicated to that training day to day? Not leaving that to somebody else, not leaving that to teachers, Sunday school teachers, pastors. Are we dedicated to actually doing that training day to day with our sons and our daughters from infancy until young adulthood, as we ourselves train along the way according to life, to show our sons and daughters the way and give them instruction? If we'll do that, this is a promise that when he is old, he shall not depart from it. Even when he is old, he turneth not from it. I'm going to read one other really sort of well-known scripture to you. 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verse 14. If my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Now I could do a whole commentary on that, and I don't want to get into that right now because I want to keep this short. No such thing with me, right? But think about this. If my people which are called by my name, we don't have to even really know exactly what that means for this purpose, but that's something to unpack. If they will humble themselves, pray, seek my face, 1, 2, 3, then I will hear from heaven. Listen, some people believe that God hears every prayer. God himself says he doesn't. If my son comes to me and he's emotionally distraught because he's hurt and he's talking to me in a whiny voice, I'm all ears. If my daughter has her feelings hurt, something really happened to bother her, I'm gonna listen. But if somebody's got some minor complaint and they come to me in this terrible whiny voice, you know what I'm talking about, parents, I don't give ear to that. I'll tell them, look, this isn't really something to be so upset about, and I'm not going to listen to the whining. Take a moment and collect yourself a little bit, kind of gather your thoughts and get control of yourself. Come back and talk to me. When you can talk to me without whining, I don't give ear to that. If they will do 1, 2, 3, I will hear from heaven, forgive their sin and heal their land. If If. There's a promise, but there's an if. And this is no different, Proverbs 22:6. Give instruction to a youth, train them up in the way they should go. Train with them from infancy to young adulthood, according to the way of life. And when they are old, they shall not depart from it. Not this wishy-washy sermon you hear all the time. Well, you do your best as a parent, and then it's up to them. Yeah, everybody's got free will. But either this promise is true or not true. Look, for all intents and purposes, we're just going to assume that Solomon wrote this, although Bible scholars say he didn't. I believe he did. Who did he write it to? Any number of his sons and daughters, right? But Rehoboam, more likely than not. His son, who would be the king. He's writing this to his son. Did Solomon train Rehoboam up? He's giving instruction in Proverbs to his son. He wrote all kinds of great writings, but what did he do? He chased after worldly pleasures, pleasures of the flesh. He chased after worldly goods, after money, after power, after fame. And at the end of his life in Ecclesiastes, he's telling us all of it's meaningless. I did everything there is to do under the sun. I chased everything, and I find that it's all meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Did he return to the way? I believe Solomon did return to the way. But along the way, did he show Rehoboam the way according to life? Was he dedicated while his son was a child, a kid, an infant? Child, there's that word again. An infant to young adulthood? It seems that he didn't. And also, you can look in the Bible, this plays out multiple times in Scripture. And I think that in our modern Western church, and it has been this way for a long time, a pastor is expected to basically forsake even his own family as being the first responsibility, his first ministry, to the ministry of the church. And then you see so many people who grew up in the church with parents who are leaders in the church, and they've forsaken the way. Were they really trained up? Because God is dedicated to us. As a father, he's dedicated to his sons and daughters. Are we dedicated to ours? He was so dedicated. Here comes the Son of God, God and man, this great mystery, and we'll get into that later. To show us the way in the flesh that we should walk according to the way of life. God is absolutely dedicated to showing us the way. Are we as parents dedicated to showing them the way, willing to forsake all other responsibilities for a time, at a time as necessary to be a parent? Look, earning money is important. Doing XYZ is important. But if there's a moment where you need to give instruction, where you need to show the way, that needs to take precedence as often as it's possible. You look at Eli, his sons Hophni and Phinehas, they weren't like him. The people are like, man, we're worried. Eli let them get away with their sin. Eli, maybe, I'm just kind of speculating here, he was so dedicated to the office of priesthood that he wasn't as dedicated to being a father as he needed to be. He certainly seems accepting of the judgment that's coming down upon his sons. It's spoken through Samuel to Eli. Eli accepts it. He's got no problem with it, does he? And I think also that you have there, a little aside, a picture of God's redemption. Because God sees that Eli, a man who loves him, has failed at his job, his first office of being a father. And now his sons aren't like him because he wasn't dedicated first to them like God is dedicated first to us. And so God gives him Samuel. He gives him another chance. He says when Samuel hears God speaking, I didn't call you my son. This is his son to him, and he's raising up now. He's dedicated now to raising Samuel up in the way that he's supposed to. And just look at the person that Samuel becomes. So, to me, this is a promise, and it's a beautiful promise, but it's a promise that puts the responsibility, the onus entirely on us. I have got a whole house full of sons and daughters, and the responsibility is mine. It's mine. It's mine to, in a healthy way, partner daily with Teresa, my wife, to be parents to our sons and daughters, to stay on the way according to life, to train daily, to run this race and run with them, showing them the way. It's nobody else's job. It's my job. And if I do that job somehow, by the grace of God, just with some small measure of success, then God fills in where my weakness is. But I've got to be dedicated to it. I've got to be seeking daily to understand more so. What does it mean for me to be dedicated to training them according to the way of life? If I do that, then when they're old, they won't depart from it. What a beautiful promise, but what a heavy responsibility. If we're willing to believe this promise, then we need to be willing to take that responsibility and to cast aside, as Paul writes when he's talking about running the race, anything, everything that hinders us. Parents, in James we read, I believe it's in James, we read that if you want to be a teacher, watch out, because now you're held to a higher accountability, a higher standard. If you want to be a parent, then you want to be a teacher. That's your job. It's not the school's job. It's not the Sunday school teacher's job. It's not culture's job. It's your job as a parent to teach them. If you're going to be a teacher, you're held to a higher standard. You better train harder than your student. And you need to be dedicated to that training until your student is no longer your student. What a beautiful promise. What a heavy responsibility. Those are my thoughts on Proverbs 22:6. Feel free to share what you think in the comments. Until next time, shalom, friends. I was going to make a separate video sharing a poem, but I decided I'm just going to tack it on to the end of this video about Proverbs 22:6. I'm not going to read the whole poem. You can check it out. I think it's an excellent poem. And I believe I shared it on our Foster Family and Faith Facebook page. If I didn't, I will. Khalil Gibran, hopefully I pronounced his name right. This is a poem that's in public domain. And it's called On Children. And I'm just going to leave out the very beginning and the middle and read to you some parts that I think are, in some ways really poignant and connected to what I shared as by extension. My thoughts on Proverbs 22, chapter 6, 22:6. All right. Your children are not your children. They are sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. You may give them love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. Continuing on, you are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. For even as he loves the arrow that flies, he also loves the bow that is stable. Shalom, friends. Until next time.